Hello, geography students. This is Mrs. Wildy, and this is part 3 of our Introduction to Geography video lectures. This is a little more involved than the other two have been, maybe a little longer. But I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by it. I just want you to get some basic information within this video lecture. Take notes, Cornell notes, the record column, but just know that we're going to elaborate and do a little more processing of this information in class than maybe we have in the first two sections. So take notes, but bring in questions and be ready to discuss it. This is going to focus mostly on the 5 themes of geography. You can connect anything that we discuss in class to one of these 5 themes. So the first theme is location. And the simplest way to think about this is just, where is it? Okay, and there's different ways of doing that. We've talked about absolute location versus relative location in the past, but it's also a little more involved than that. It deals with 2 concepts called site and situation. Site is describing the physical characteristics of a location. Situation is sort of the, again, relative to other things. So the location of a place relative to other things. For example, if you were going to describe your town or city only by discussing its location in terms of relationships with other places around it, that would be your situation. If you were describing your town or city only by its physical characteristics, the landforms, the climate, those kind of things, that's going to be site. So again, the first situation, or the first explanation or description would be situation, the second would be site. Much of South Louisiana is made up of swampland. This would be site. Baton Rouge is next to the Mississippi River. Situation. First Woodlawn High School was built on a fault line. Site. New Woodlawn High School was built next to a church. Situation. So hopefully that's fairly easy to keep track of. Another concept or term, and we're going to really focus on this within our chapter on language, but it does have to do with location, is the term toponym. And this is just a place name. So again, we Hollywood is the toponym, or Willie Nelson Boulevard is a toponym. It's just a name for a place on Earth. And of course, we're going to talk about more in terms of why a place is named what it is. That has to relate to that human or cultural geography there. Second theme is region. And region is an area in the Earth defined by one or more distinctive characteristics. I also like to explain it sort of in the idea that you're going to have a region where it has similar characteristics within that region that separate it from another region with different characteristics. So that's important to kind of think of. And we'll talk about the regions of the United States and regions of the world in much more detail in class. This is a map of names for carbonated beverage, whether it's soda or pop or Coke, and where you will hear those. So you may have a region that would be named the soda region of the country, and certainly there are going to be people within that region that may say pop or may say Coke, but for the majority or dominant naming, it's going to be that type of region. There are 3 types of regions, so you can subdivide that theme into 3 different types. One is formal. These have distinct characteristics. Usually the borders are easy to keep track of, very slow to change, and if you ask someone in Georgia, or if you ask somebody in Australia, if you ask somebody in Tanzania, they should all come up with the same specific place for that formal region. It's very clear, distinct boundaries. So things like political regions, like states or countries, these are clear boundaries. You can even have physical features. You know when you are on a mountain or when you're not. You know when you are in an ocean or not. So those are formal regions as well. Functional regions, second type, is only there because it serves a purpose. So it's organized around a central node for a second, or a central productive area. So a lot of times transportation networks are part of functional regions, like this underground tube station in London. That's a functional region. It's only there to transport people. A newspaper distribution center or a store or a school, all are there to provide a purpose or serve a purpose. So they're a functional region. This is a third type of region, which is perceptual. And this is where you can have some fuzzy definitions because it's based on people's culture or their experiences, their memories, what they perceive happens there. So it may differ based on who you ask. Again, this is sort of the world, what you sort of associate with people. You may have completely different perceptions of what happens in, in Russia or Africa, for example. So they're going to be more informal. They vary based on who you're talking about. So this is also used a lot for different groupings of areas or groupings of states, for example. Again, the South, the Deep South, the West, those are going to be perceptual because some people may include all of Texas in the Deep South, whereas this map does not, for example. It has some people putting it in the Deep South, some people putting it in the South, and some even extending it into the Southwest. So it depends on the person about where that perceptual region starts and ends, and that's why it's perceptual. Third theme is movement, fairly self-explanatory. Of course, it's going to be people moving and how they move. It's also ideas, it's products, it's information and how it gets from one place to another. And certainly with movement, we're going to talk a whole lot about how things have changed across time or through the years. So time traveling or traveling through, not time travel, excuse me, traveling around the world has changed through the years. And some of the reasons for that are, of course, the transportation and communication networks that we have. One term related to the idea of movement is distance decay or information movement. So distance decay is the lessening interaction between places as the friction of distance increases. So as the further the distance, the less likely things are going to get diffused or spread or understood. And so the friction of distance means that you have, the further the distance, the more friction, or less friction, excuse me, you're going to have between people, which means you're going to have less interaction. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. We'll talk about it more in class. So distance decay, again, this is sort of a chart to kind of show you, but you have convenience store, obviously there are going to be more of those more often, and so your friction of distance is much greater. More people have more interaction within their convenience stores. The grocery stores may be further away, and then superstores, of course, people are willing to go further for them, but again, you may not have quite as much interaction there. Space-time compression is the reduction in time it takes for something to reach another place. So because of our communication and transportation, that idea of distance decay doesn't really apply anymore. It doesn't matter if the supercenter is 30 miles away, because you can get there so quickly, it doesn't really apply. You're like, no, it's worth it to go. Or let's say for information is more likely. Something that happens across the world is going to get to you in seconds, so the distance doesn't matter. So that's space-time compression. Again, here's sort of a image of how between 1500 and 1840 the world felt fairly wide, fairly large, hard to get around, hard interaction. With each amount of exploration and interaction between people, more technology development, more communication development, internet, all of those things have made it where the world just seems very small, because we can get things what we want when we want it within certainly seconds, if not next day. So determining the interaction, certainly that's going to have a lot to play in terms of proximity, so the nearness to important features, connectivity, directness of routes, so is it easy to get there? Are we connected very easily? Airports connect us, highways connect us, even the internet, connects us. And accessibility is the relative ease at which you are able to reach your location. That's going to be accessibility. The gravity model is connected with distance decay and time-space compression. It says that the interaction between two places is equal to the population divided by the distance. So here is the actual formula for it. So the interaction between I and j equals the population of I times the population of j divided by the distance between I and j squared. I haven't really seen this on the AP exam. However, I do like to teach it just so you know it. Sometimes this is discussed with more example-based rather than actual numbers for a formula. But you should be able to understand what the gravity model is and how it relates to the idea of distance decay. So some insights into the gravity model are going to be that larger cities have greater gravitational pull than smaller ones. Again, their population has that interaction pull. Two large cities like Los Angeles and New York can still have pull with each other because of their populations, even though the distance is great between them. All right, so along also with this theme goes the idea of diffusion, again, movement of people or movement of ideas, movement of products. So diffusion is just the process by which characteristics spread across space, and they have to spread from the hearth. So the cultural hearth is the place where the innovation or culture change started. And we've talked about this in terms of the summer reading. So this is a map showing you religion and sort of where it began and where it spread to. This is the diffusion routes. Okay, so we'll talk about this in great detail, not only in Chapter 1, but also when we get to culture in Chapter 4. So how do culture elements diffuse? First of all, you have your core or your hearth of where it really defines the region. The domain is a little bit less dominant. And the sphere is where you have even less dominance or less influence, but it can still be there for a minority in the area. There are, just like there are types of regions, there are types of diffusions. Two main categories of diffusion are relocation and expansion. Relocation means people have to move for the idea to spread. Expansion diffusion, nobody has to move. The ideas move, but people don't have to move. And under the umbrella of expansion diffusion, you have three types of expansion diffusion: hierarchical, contagious, and stimulus. So again, relocational is that people have to move from place to place for that diffusion to occur. The percent of purses containing a euro coin in France, February 2002 versus May 2002. Again, you're going to have that people have to move for it to happen, for that money to move. In August 2002, even greater. November 2002, and I believe that's it. All right, so in terms of expansion diffusion, contagious diffusion we'll talk about first. And this you can think of very much like a disease. Diseases spread contagiously. They don't really care who you are, what your background is, how much money you make, who your father was. All of those things don't matter. It's trying to get to as many people as possible. So religions tend to diffuse, at least originally from the hearth, diffusing in all directions to all the population. That's contagious. So this is a map, I think this is also in our textbook, about Dr. Snow and the cholera epidemic in London. And what he did was he mapped the cases of cholera, and he was able to tell where the hearth was, where it started, and more specifically that it was from a water pump. So that's how we know that this was a waterborne disease. Hierarchical diffusion, hard to say, is that you have specific people or groups that it's going to. It picks and chooses. So contagious does not care who it is. It goes to everybody, all ages, all groups. Hierarchical cares. It cares about the age, it cares about the gender, possibly, it cares about the profession that people do, it cares about the economic well-being of the people, and it's going to pick certain groups first. It may ultimately get to everybody, but the first way it's going to diffuse is through certain groups of people. So again, this is another type of expansion diffusion is stimulus diffusion, and this is where really the idea has to change in order for it to be spread to all groups, meaning that there may be a cultural barrier that the let's say the food or the fashion type goes to. It comes up against that barrier, and so the food has to change to adapt to that culture barrier, and then the barrier goes away and people will accept it. That's stimulus diffusion. So, all right, fourth theme is place. This sort of describes what it is like there. So geographers analyze space several different ways. This is how the big affect the small, how the small affect the big, what characteristics of the big are part of the small, what characteristics of the small are part of the big. But really, you're talking about what it is like there. So what are you going to be able to tell about the area based on what you would find there? And again, scale has a lot to do with this. You're going to find different ideas based on what types of maps you're looking at. So for the example here, they give you sort of your perception of cancer rates for the whole entire country of the United States, and then you get much more specific in terms of the counties within Louisiana. You can tell a much different picture. Certainly the dominance is still there, but you can tell where there are certain areas where the cancer rates are less, and maybe there's a reason for that. But you can't tell it just by looking at this map. You have to go into more a different scale map in order to be able to tell it. Distribution should be fairly simple, but it's obviously where how things are arranged within a service or within space. Density is the you can have a high density and a low density, but that's how things in 1 square unit of space are, how many of them there is. Concentration, again, is a way that you may be able to tell how closely things are related within an area. And then pattern is going to be how things are arranged. Like, can you see an actual pattern, I guess is how I should say it. So can you see similarities within space of those things or how they're arranged? We'll talk more about place in much more detail in class. The final theme we're going to talk about is human-environment interaction. And that's just how humans modify, adapt to, depend on, change, whatever, their environment. It also is how the environment affects humans. So certainly it's important to talk about how humans have changed the environment through deforestation, cutting down trees. Let's also make sure we understand that the environment has affected people in terms of natural disasters, in terms of landforms and how people can live on them or not live on them. So it goes both ways. It's an interaction between both the human and the environment. Another term tied to this is cultural ecology, and that's the study of human-environment relationships. So oftentimes you'll talk about more specifically not just an environmental geographer, but more specifically an ecologist with a cultural twist. They want to look at the human aspect of it, not just the environment. Now there are 2 terms that we're going to talk about a little bit more, and it's at the very end of the chapter. But there's the environmental determinism and possibilism. And this is sort of 2 schools of thought, although I would argue that neither one of these are really the focus of too many geographers right now. It used to be, though, that many geographers said our environment determines our success or our failure. So it's it's the environment in which we live that is the puzzle at which some cultures will develop and some cultures won't. That seemed to be somewhat negative or pessimistic for some geographers, and so there was a new school of thought about possibilism. And what that said is, yes, the environment is going to have its part it plays, but it's the choices that people make with the environment they live in that can lead to their success and or their failure. It's that people have a part they play within their the choices and their ability to modify their environment that can lead to success or could ultimately lead to failure. But the environment is not the sole reason for the success or failure. Oh, sorry, that's the end of Unit 1. Again, we're going to go into much more detail, but this is sort of an overview of Chapter 1 through video lecture. You're welcome to use all 3 of these to review for the test, but I also suggest that you look through the textbook Chapter 1. Certainly the vocabulary is a big deal, and also, of course, our class activities are going to correspond very well. So hopefully this has been informational, and I will see you next time. Bye.